Hi there, listeners of Accents on WUKY. This is Katerina Stoykova. I have the pleasure of serving as the director of the Kentucky Book Festival, a program of Kentucky Humanities. With me today is writer Marcia Thornton Jones, one of the authors for the upcoming 43rd issue of the festival on November 2nd. Hi, Marcia.
Hi, Katerina. It's delightful to be here.
I'm so happy to be talking to you. Why don't we start by you telling us about your new book?
Thanks. Yes, the newest book that I have is the graphic novel Dragons Don't Cook Pizza. We have a series of the Bailey School Kids, The Adventures of the Bailey School Kids. It was originally published in 1990, was the first book, which was Vampires Don't Wear Polka Dots. There are probably close to 80 titles in that series and the spin-off series for the Adventures of the Bailey School Kids. And I'm super excited that now there is the spin-off graphic novels, where some of the original stories are being retold as graphic novels. So this is the fourth in that series, Dragons Don't Cook Pizza.
So when you said our series, it is you and Debbie Dady, right?
Correct. This series was co-authored with Debbie Dady. Debbie Dady and I used to teach together here in Lexington. We met at Sayre Elementary. She taught first grade, I taught third grade, and then she went to be she changed jobs and she became the media specialist for Sayre School. And I was working in the computer lab and writing lab at the time. And we met up after school one day in the school weight room. We were lifting weights, believe it or not. And that's why I always tell kids, don't mess with me. I lift weights. But we were lifting weights and we just started talking about our favorite thing, and that was books. We liked our favorite part of the school day was when we got to read stories to our students. So we started talking about the books that we read. We talked about the books that we liked. And then we also talked about books that we weren't quite crazy about. And one of us said to the other, sometimes I think I could do better than that. And the person who replied, that was me. And Debbie said, why don't we try? And so the next day during our 20-minute teacher's lunch break, we sat down and tried to write a children's book. It wasn't quite that easy. It took us a couple of years. But then our first book came out, which was Vampires Don't Wear Polka Dots. And then we wrote another one, and that was Werewolves Don't Go to Summer Camp. And we wrote a third one, which was Santa Claus Doesn't Mop Floors. And the funny thing about that is that when we were writing those books, we would send them to the publisher, and the publisher would reject them and say they were not interested in a series. But instead of giving up, we just kept revising and editing until we thought we had a book worth publishing, and the publisher decided, yeah, okay, we'll publish this one.
So the same publisher?
Same publisher.
That is so interesting because normally people would say, okay, this is a closed door. I'm not going to keep on knocking here, but you kept on revising and not giving up. How many times did you submit?
So the second book, which was Werewolves Don't Go to Summer Camp, we submitted it 3 times before they would publish it. And that they told us is that this is not a series. We're not interested in a series. So we will call it a companion book, which is why we chose to use a pattern in the title. We use the pattern of using don't or doesn't in our titles for that series because we wanted readers to recognize that those books were companions. They went together in some way. With Santa Claus Doesn't Mop Floors, it was one of the easiest books we've ever written. It was just so fun. We sat down and it almost wrote itself. And the publishers, when they saw it, they said, okay, we'll publish this one too, but this is not going to be a series.
I think you need one that says, this publisher doesn't publish series.
Really. Or writers don't give up.
Right.
Because we just kept writing, and we wrote a 4th book, same thing, 5th book, same thing. We were on our 6th book when the publisher called and said they liked the book and they were going to publish it and add it to the series.
They were the ones that used the S word.
They used the S word. And we were like, wait, hold on. We thought it wasn't going to be a series. And they said, well, 6 books sounds like a series to us. And that's how the books became a series. And then we had to backtrack and we had to name the series and come up with a series Bible. So we kind of did it backwards. But anyway, that's how Debbie Dady and I started writing. And then the fun thing, she moved. Right after the 6th book, she left Kentucky. So we had to figure out a new way to write our stories together. Because up until that time, Debbie Dady and I would sit down side by side and we would speak the stories. And as we would speak the stories, I would type them in as fast as I could. And I think that was helpful for us because it allowed us to slip into strong dialogue for our characters. And what's interesting is Debbie has a very different writing style than my own. And we laugh and say between the two of us, we have created a third writing style. There's her style, there's my style, and then combined is a third one. But yes, there was a lot of trust and a lot of learning, too. We both were starting from scratch and learning not only how to write a book and all that entails, but also the business of writing.
Say more about the business of writing.
Well, it starts with, what do you do with the stories that you've published? So here's another interesting writing lesson that we learned. So we wrote several books before that first one, and we would do our market research. We would look for publishers that we thought would be a good match for those books. We would send them off to the publishers, and they would get rejected. And we'd go through the process over and over again. Well, when we wrote the book, Vampires Don't Wear Polka Dots, we really wrote that as a joke. So when we finished it, we didn't want to send it to one of our top publishers on our list because we thought, well, it's just a joke. It's a silly book. And we wanted the serious publishers to take us seriously. So in our questionable wisdom, we selected a publisher we thought we didn't have a chance to publish with. It was one of the biggest publishers in the children's book world. And we thought there's no way we'll ever get to publish with them. So we just sent it to them. And they're the ones that published it. And it was interesting because at the time, as is now, they don't accept unsolicited manuscripts, only agented ones. But ours was unsolicited. So they picked it out of the slush pile and published it. So
that's amazing.
I know.
Yeah.
We broke rules. We learned lessons. You know, one of the lessons we learned: don't give up, be persistent,
and break rules,
and break some rules. Or maybe the better lesson is, if you really work hard on your stories and you make them as good as you can, and you match them to a publisher that publishes that kind of stories, your chances are better. Which is, we did that maybe a little bit on purpose, but also a lot of accidents along the way. So once we did that, then we had to learn all the business about, contracts and, rights and where they were going to publish. And that was back in the day also about how to do promotions. It was before social media. So we were getting on planes and doing book tours and having to navigate that. Although I will say the company, which was Scholastic, was phenomenal. They would, arrange book tours for us and things like that. So, it was all of that while also juggling full-time jobs, family duties, and then more book contracts. Because after we wrote that 6th book, they started to give us multi-book contracts. And so then we were under contract, and we might have 4 books within a year that we'd have to write. One year we had to write 10 books in a year.
Did you go to work early to meet, or how did you manage that?
After that 6th book, since she left, she moved.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Yeah, she moved. We had to develop a whole new style. So what we do is we write a fairly good outline. In fact, another writer and I were having a little friendly argument. She was a proclaimed pantser, which meant she believed that a writer should just sit down and write with no plan and learn through discovery writing about your book, and that if you have outlines and plans, it would ruin the creative process. And I was telling her, no, I think you need an outline, because that's what Debbie and I learned to do, is we would write an outline, and then we took turns, and then we would take turns writing chapters. So one of us would look at the outline, and we would write 2 chapters. We would revise and edit it, then send it to the other person. So let's say I start the book and write 2 chapters. I would send it to Debbie. And this was back in the days of fax machines. So I would fax it to Debbie. And then she would look at the outline and read my chapters, and she had total permission to edit and revise in any way. And then she would write the next 2 chapters, send it to me. Well, since I did not know what she had changed in the first chapters that I wrote, I'd have to start from the very beginning and revise and edit the 4 chapters and then write the next 2. And so we would pass it back and forth, and we called that hot potato writing, because if you play the game of hot potato, you know you don't want to drop that hot potato. If you do, you lose. Well, if we drop that hot potato, we won't get the book finished and we won't get it published.
So when you, let's say you work on chapters 8 and 9, did you start from chapter 1 to read the whole thing to make sense? So basically chapter 1 and 2 got ton of attention.
That's right, they did. And the story would change.
Of course.
And we would surprise each other because we had that outline, what we would call an outline, but yet we would change as we wrote. So I was having that little friendly argument with a friend of mine, and I was saying, no, you need an outline. And she finally said, let me see that outline of yours. So I showed her an outline, and it was about 20 pages, and the outline included dialogue, descriptions, action, but it was numerated. So it was like 1, this is going to happen. And then we would have a couple of pages, all single space, all 1 block paragraph. But she looked at me and she laughed and she said, Marcia, this is an outline. It's a rough draft.
That's what it sounds like to me, yes.
So we actually would start with that, what we call an outline, but it was a rough draft. So our books would be revised and edited multiple times, being passed back and forth that way. So it's interesting that even though, let's say, I did start those first 2 chapters, when we look back now and read those stories, we can't tell who wrote which chapter because both of us were involved with all the chapters multiple times, putting our own thumbprint on each and every one.
And knowing that somebody has your back in every word, that is so comforting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and now one of the challenges for writers is to find beta readers. Find somebody to read their draft to see if, they make sense, if, the story is appealing, all sorts of stuff. Well, see, I had that automatically with Debbie, and she had it with me. So that was very helpful. So when we finished a book, it had been revised and edited a great deal, and it was ready to go.
And now that some of these stories are being retold as graphic novels, what's the process, and do you have other people working with you, such as the artists, or are the editors handling that?
All of us are involved with
it.
But mostly the editor. He runs point. It's a very interesting process. For one reason, I am not an artist, and I don't think visually like an artist does. So it's always surprising to see the illustrations. Even in our earlier books, it would be totally surprising to see the covers and would be like, oh, that's what our characters look like. I hadn't really envisioned it to that level. But with the graphic novels, now you have to start with the visuals. So, I'm going to take that back. It starts with the story. So the process is the editor works with the illustrator to pick out the highlighted scenes that they're going to illustrate. So they're the pivotal plot scenes. So all the other stuff falls away, and the bare pivotal plot is pulled out, and that's illustrated.
Does that hurt?
No, actually, it's again a very interesting process, and it's exciting. And what I like seeing, there are words. Most of the book is the original text. Now I say most because these books were written in the 90s and early 2000s. So yeah, we have to update and change some things. But it's so exciting to see that the story still stands. And it's solid. That story is solid. Now, once the editor and the illustrator have pulled out this pivotal scenes that they want to highlight, then we get to start seeing the really rough pages because there are our original words, so the story is there. But then we have to look at it and say, we look at things like character development, plot, flow, action, is there maybe a better scene? So we kind of come into it a little bit once they have a rough draft.
Can you please read us a little bit from the new book?
Oh, let's do it. We'll read this.
Okay.
All right. This is from Dragonstone Cooked Pizza. Now, the whole premise of the Adventures of the Bailey School Kids is that there's a group of kids who suspect that the adults in their world aren't your typical adults, and they just might be folklore characters. So, for example, in Vampires Don't Wear Polka Dots, that was our first book, they suspect that their new substitute teacher is a vampire or some kind of monster. And in Werewolves Don't Go to Summer Camp, they think the camp counselor is a werewolf. Well, in Dragons Don't Cook Pizza, the new pizza restaurant owner, they think just might be a knight, and the cook just may be a dragon. And he has renovated the pizza place into a big castle. And so what the Bailey School Kids decide is, in all the series, the premise is they have to save Bailey City from this folklore character, maybe even the whole world from this folklore character. I mean, after all, you can't have a vampire as your teacher, right? You got to save everybody. So here they think they need to not only save the city from a dragon, but this one has a twist. They also need to save the dragon. So after school, they go into the dungeon. They come up with a plan. We'll sneak through the back door of the pizza castle, avoid Sir George and his minions, and we'll free the dragon before Sir George can use his magic sword. Easy. I'd rather be here than doing homework, but this whole plan is a big waste of time, said Eddie. Howie told him, well, I bet you'll change your mind when we find the dragon hidden in the dungeon. Thud, thud, thud. The 5 friends go over the drawbridge leading to the castle. Is the back door clear, Melody? Liza asked. We need to get closer, she said. Follow me. They dash around the castle. Quick, hide behind the dumpster, Melody said. The 5 kids hid, waiting for somebody to open the back door. P.U., what's that smell? It's worse than the boiled broccoli from the cafeteria, Eddie complained. Liza covered her nose. Maybe it's dragon poop. Shh, they'll hear us. As they waited for someone to open the door, Eddie looked over his friend's shoulders. What's the holdup? I thought Howie and Melody had this all planned out. Shh, Melody said. We need to wait for someone to open the door. Suddenly, the door opened. Slam! And out walked a knight in armor. And I'll stop there.
Lovely, thank you.
By the way, I have to say, yes, there was a word there that some people might find objectionable. However, funny story, we wanted to use that word in an earlier book, and our editor said no. We cannot have that word in a children's book. Well, it just so happened that Debbie and I were doing an author visit in a school somewhere near New York, and our editor came out to meet us, and she was there while we were talking to a whole room full of kids. And we told our editor before doing the talk that we were going to prove to her that that word and other words belonged in kids' books because kids paid attention to those kinds of words. And she was like, no, we can't have that. So Debbie and I were up there talking about writing and books and how we love to read and the importance of reading. And all of a sudden we just kind of paused and one of us went, underwear. The whole group sat up. The kids started laughing. They were paying attention. And the editor said, you proved your point. So after that, but you have to understand, our books came out before Captain Underpants.
Yeah.
I like to think we had something to do with maybe helping
I'm sure.
that.
Trailblazed.
That's right.
Yeah. And what has been the weirdest or some of the weirder things or animals or characters that the Bailey kids suspect their teachers and adults could be?
That is such a great question. You have to understand that when Debbie and I started writing these books, neither one of us liked scary stories. And we were not well versed in folklore characters. In fact, the reason we started with vampires is because that is a pretty well-known creature, right? Or folklore character. And we were like, well, everybody knows about vampires and the folklore behind it. We didn't have a whole lot of research that we had to do. So the second book was werewolves. Same thing. It was like, well, everybody knows what a werewolf is, right? We know about silver bullets and, it's pretty standard folklore. Santa Claus was our third book. Well, sure, everybody, that's so much a part of our culture and as a character. And then we did Ghost, which was another very common. Well, after we did the common ones, we had to start doing some research because this was not in our wheelhouse. So we have done books on Ghost, The Bride of Frankenstein. We've done ogres and zombies and I'm trying to think. Well, the dragons. We've done several of Dracula's. We brought Dracula in. And then we also did several Frankensteins and several Bride of Frankenstein. So there was almost like like little trilogies for those. So that's how we had to do a lot of research. And then we'd have to research and find out, okay, what is the folklore behind this? Because we use common folklore elements in the story.
Do you have another one in the works?
Not right now. We're waiting to see what Scholastic is going to do next with the graphic novels. We are working on having a lot of the titles. I'm not going to say all of them because I'm not sure at this point. We just signed a new contract for having the Bailey School Kids on Audible. So they're coming out in audios and, fingers crossed, maybe some other fun things are in the works.
These are all fantastic news, and you are the author of 3-digit number of books.
Yes.
Tell us more. How does that happen?
Well, a lot of those are the Bailey School Kids. We have several
spin-off
series.
Yeah?
Yeah.
How many years did it take?
Well, that's a good question. The first one came out in 1990, and I'm not sure when we actually stopped adding to the Bailey Schools universe. With new stories. Now we're reinventing them. But we had the spin-off series, the Bailey City Monsters. We had the Bailey School Kids Junior chapter books. So we had several spin-offs. And then we had another series, Ghostville Elementary, the Barkley School for Dogs. So we were doing a lot of other series in the midst of continuing the Bailey School Kids. And then I have some standalone novels as well. I have picture books and mid-grade novels as well that are standalones.
What did it feel like to start writing your books on your own?
That was a scary venture, but yet in a way it was liberating. Because like I said, working with a partner, she has her style, I have my style, and we had to blend them for the third style. And so it was kind of nice to be able to sit down and say, okay, I want to develop my own voice. And I realized it was more difficult than before because I did not have that person that was there asking me for the next chapter. So there was a lot of discipline involved that I could just take a nap rather than write the next chapters. And also it was interesting to find that my voice was not quite as lighthearted as the Bailey School Kids. And so developing that and was a little bit of a challenge, but it was surprising and it was exciting. And I think like with almost every writer I know, once I would finish a book and then read it, I was like, wow, where did that come from? And it's exciting to find what's bubbling underneath the surface that sometimes we ourselves are not aware of.
I love it when my writing surprises me. I feel like I have reached a part of myself that I hadn't had access to before. It always has a thrill with it, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
No matter how dark the thing you uncover, there is always the sense of liberation, at least to me. Do you agree?
I agree, totally. And I think it needs to come out. And you think about all that's pent up and we don't release on the page, so many of us. And I think writing is a fabulous way to do that. And it's also a way to learn about yourselves. But there's a little bit of distance with the way I do it because I write fiction. And so I can let my characters work out some problems.
Do you ever wonder, because I do you ever wonder What do people who don't write do about getting connected to themselves and keeping connected to themselves?
I do, but I am also surprised at how many people out there are writing
True.
in some way, shape, or form, which I think is wonderful to learn. I think a lot of people do it through reading, because that's one of the things. If you look at what books people remember and enjoy the most, it's the ones that they had an emotional connection to.
Yes.
Because on some level it's connected to them. So I think many people do it that way. And then I think that there are, through multiple art forms. You know, even when you sit down and crochet, it's meditative. So through a lot of different art forms that are meditative.
How is your young adult novel coming along?
Oh, you had to ask that. It's coming along slowly. And this has been a challenge because I've never written young adult. I always said I do not want to write a young adult novel. I avoided writing a young adult novel. I wrote in circles around this story idea, trying to make it not a young adult novel. And I finally had to decide this is a young adult novel. So I have been working on it. I have most of a rough draft, and now I'm going back and revising my draft based on some new information.
Do you have a deadline, a goal?
You gave me a deadline to have it done by this year. So yes.
Awesome.
I do. But I've kind of been lax the last couple months.
The year is young.
That's right.
The year is young.
That's right. I tell you, it's interesting when I feel for myself as a creative that when I'm involved in other creative endeavors, my writing slacks off. And it's almost like that I only have so much creative energy, and I use it up, and then I'm just spent. And recently I've been doing a lot of teaching. And I enjoy teaching. I really do. I teach for the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning, and I teach a class on writing kids' books. I'm teaching a class on how to write a novel in 6 months. I'm teaching a class this summer on writing picture books, and then this summer also another writing kids' book class. So that keeps me hopping because I'm always coming up with new prompts and new ways to teach or at least illustrate writing elements for people that are interested in writing.
Here is what I found out through my teaching. I can either think about my own writing or other people's writing. That has been true to me. But there is another thing that I have found to be true, and it's due to the generous universe out there, around us. After I spend a period of time teaching or putting energy and effort into other people's writing, then as soon as I turn to mine, things come together very quickly.
I hope that's true. But I'm like you. I spend so much time thinking about other people's writing and how to help other people with their writing. But yet, I also realize that many times the focus of lessons help me.
Yes.
And in fact, the whole idea for my young adult novel was born in a writing class during one of the prompts that I gave. And that's how this whole thing started. And so whenever I give a prompt in class, I would just anchor it in that story world. And I kept building on this story idea. And pretty soon I had like 50,000 words of prompt writing. And I thought, you know what? Maybe I should do something with this.
And you have worked with emerging writers through the Carnegie Center quite a bit. What did writing with emerging writers of all genres teach you about the writing process?
That there is no one way to write, that we have to be open to different processes and different ways of thinking, and that the number one thing that we all need to do is actually sit down and write.
I'm going to interject something that I've learned over the last year, reading people's bios. for quite a few books. And the thing that I have learned is do not wait to write your books. Write them now. Start now. If you have a book in you, don't wait until you retire. Don't wait until the summer. Don't wait. You start now.
I think that's an excellent piece of advice. And then with that, you need to read a lot, become very familiar with the sound and the pacing of the kinds of stories you want to write, and also to be open to learning ways to make your writing even stronger. Writing is not as easy as some people think it is.
And maybe it's not as difficult as some other people think it is.
Good point. Good point. But one of the things I want to say, too, is that the most important thing about writing is that it's a form of communication. We're communicating with ourselves, but it's also a form of communicating with others. It makes our world so much larger, so much more exciting, because we send out our stories and people are reading them, and it closes that communication cycle. You know, if we send out something and if we speak and nobody listens, there's an emptiness, right? And we lose our voice if you don't think anybody's listening.
Well, there is the tree that fell in the woods, right?
Right, yes. So when we write, we are communicating, or at least we're initiating communication. And it's so exciting to know that when you find out that people are out there not only reading it, but they're getting it.
Yes.
And it's like, yeah, I felt that, and I really related to this character, or this made a difference. And that is one of the most amazing things that I have learned. I remember when I stopped, I used to be a school teacher, and when I stopped teaching, kids would ask me, why did you decide you didn't want to teach anymore? And my answer always was, I've always been a teacher, it's just that my classroom has is now as big as the world. Whereas I used to have 28 or 32 kids, now it's millions. And so it's really an exciting thing to realize that even something as fun as The Adventures of the Bailey School Kids makes a difference. Our books are read quite often in schools. They are considered high interest for reluctant readers. Some of my favorite fan mail that I would get would be from kids who loved our books. And I remember our books, the original series, The Adventures of the Bailey School Kids, the readability level, I think, was like in the 3rd grade. So they were marketed for grades 2 to 4. Well, one time I got a letter from a 6th grader, and it just made me cry, because this 6th grader said he had never read a book before in his life. He was never able to get through a book until he read one of ours. And he said, now I can't wait to read your next one.
How special.
Right?
Yeah. Right?
And I need to share this too. Just the other day, somebody found me on social media. They saw my name, and they looked up my profile. And she said, I checked out your profile. You wrote the Bailey School Kid books. My sister and I have always been voracious readers, and we bought so many of your books from the Scholastic catalogs in our Australian primary school. Cupid Doesn't Flip Hamburgers was my favorite. All these years later, I ended up a professional songwriter and have never had an opportunity to say thank you directly to any of the writers who inspired me as a kid. So thank you, and thank you for this opportunity, Marcia Thornton Jones.
Oh, amazing.
And it's just like, I just got this out of the blue and saved it to my phone, because that's something I want to carry with me. This is important. What we do is important.
That's high impact.
Mm-hmm.
Does it make you nervous when you submit a title, kind of like fingers crossed that it passes, and I don't know what they're going to give us?
No, I think we've been at it a long time. We were just thrilled. From the get-go, when they contacted us and they said, we liked your book and we want to publish it. We were thrilled. We were dancing on the table, literally. We were in a school library, and Debbie Dady got up on the library table and started dancing when they called us. And they said, however, we don't like the ending and we need to change it. And we were fine, because we figured editors know better than we do on how to make a book that will reach a lot of kids. Sometimes it was challenging. Sometimes we may or may not have agreed with what they said, but usually when we implemented it, the books came out stronger. So I think because we were young and learning together, we were very open to instruction, and we felt our editors were our instructors. And so, no, we're not too worried. The titles were fun to come up with, and one of the ways we would do that is we would list folklore characters in one column, and then we would just brainstorm a lot of goofy things that they might not do.
Yeah.
And then we would mix and match, and we'd say, well, let's go with that one. But then sometimes it came from the story itself.
Are children now different?
I think kids are smarter. They're more worldwide. They know more about what's going on in the big wide world, I think, than maybe they always did, but we just didn't give them the credit. I think they are more, they can be kinder, but they're also dealing with a lot of big, heavy issues. But other than that, I think as a writer, no, I think kids just want a good story that they can relate to. So I think that kids are less apt to put up with didactic writing. So that's one of the things I always tell people interested in writing for kids is you, the adult, have to get off the page. This has to sound like a kid wrote it. This has to be full of kid speak. It has to be from the perspective of the kids. The adult needs to get off the page. One of the classics that I grew up with had a lot of adult narrative in it, and that would not fly at this point. So the publishing world has changed. But no, I think kids just like a good story, and they want characters they can relate to.
What is the most important thing you teach your students? If there is one thing you want them to remember from your class or workshop, what is it?
Sit down and start writing. And I will tell you, I learned that the hard way. I bought a book once upon a time. I was going on a writing retreat, and this book was, write a novel in 30 days. And it was full of all these little activities. And I was like, oh, this will be cool. I can work on this during the retreat. So I would sit down and I would do day 1 activities, day 2 activities. I was like, well, this is simple. And I got about halfway through it, and the author said, by now you should have half of your novel drafted. And what I totally missed out was the activities were supposed to get me writing. I was just doing the activities. I wasn't actually writing. And I learned, okay, no book is going to write your story for you. No class can write your story for you. I teach a class called Novel in 6 Months. And that first class, I say, you can read as many books as you want, take as many classes as you want, and I hope you show up to every single class that I teach. But that won't write the story for you. You have to sit down and actually start putting words on the page. So my phrase is words on the page.
Great way to end it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Katerina. This has been delightful.